This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Peg O'Connell, lobbyist and political analyst, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and our good friend Henry Hinton from Down East, the Talk of the Town host. Well, we've got an interesting discussion lined up for you this week, including an analysis of how we benefit from the MetLife economic incentives, the battle of car insurance rates, news regarding how much we spend on education, and pink stripe driver's licenses. So let's get started. Governor Pat McCrory was all smiles as he announced that MetLife plans to move 2,600 jobs to Charlotte and Cary. MetLife uses the cartoon character Snoopy in its advertising, but this deal wasn't peanuts. The badly needed jobs will pay salaries averaging $82,000 a year. In exchange, MetLife will receive cash and tax incentives that could reach as high as $94 million. One of the largest incentive packages in our state's history. Question one to Henry. Pat McCrory, the candidate, said that job creation was job one in his administration, but he also campaigned against the use of tax incentives. Now, he's been criticized because his former employer represented MetLife in their negotiations for these incentives. Is that criticism justified, or are the jobs worth it?
Well, there's a lot of stuff there. Let's start with the fact that, number one, he's been governor for about 8 or 9 weeks. And the MetLife deal, as we know now, was started 8 months ago. And so, you know, the governor's working on trying to do some changing with the way that the Commerce Department works, Tom. But to try to change that deal in the middle of it, can you imagine the criticism that he would have gotten if he would have said, no, we're going to stop that deal.
If he'd lost 2,600 jobs.
We're going to stop that deal, and we're going to blow up the biggest job gain that we've had in the state in the history, 2,600 jobs. Let's remember, too, that the average wage in these jobs is going to be about $84,000 per person. Now, with regard to the question about the law firm that he worked for.
Which is darn near close to twice the average income in North Carolina, I think.
Right. So it's a great deal for North Carolina. The question about whether or not it was too expensive, again, you know, largest incentive package, largest job announcement ever. But let's talk about the question that the criticism that somehow the law firm that he worked for had gotten involved. I mean, you know, there were reporters saying that he'd run out the back door, didn't answer any questions. So then he sat down with some TV stations and newspapers here in Raleigh and said, what is it you want to know? So he question asked, question answered. He said that he hasn't worked for Moore and Van Allen since December, and this deal they weren't even employed until sometime we hear now until late February, early March to get the deal done. And so, I mean, to me, it's just more criticism. It's more of the blueprint North Carolina style attack, eviscerate, and that kind of thing. It's a great deal for the state. People ought to just accept that and leave the governor, his role out of it at this point, and accept the fact that we got a great deal for North Carolina.
Well, I think that's the question that has to be asked. Did we get a great deal for North Carolina, Chris?
Well, I don't know. It's roughly $100 million, which is an incredible
125, they said.
And I think I don't think it's a great deal for North Carolina to spend this much money on any business. We're favoring one business over another. We're giving away cash, $2 million. We're giving tax credits. The Charlotte Observer, a couple stories have said that 40 to 50% of these jobs might actually be people transferring from consolidating from other offices and moving to North Carolina. Now, of course, they'll be spending money here, but I don't think it's correct to say that 2,600 people in North Carolina are going to get jobs making $84,000 apiece. I don't think favoring one business over another one is ever any good, and I think we ought to reform our incentive program, much like candidate Pat McCrory talked about. But wait a second, Henry. You've said a lot of stuff here. Now, you talked for a long time. You talked about blueprint and a lot of other stuff. Number two, McCrory's campaign manager.
Are you a little jumpy on this, Chris?
I'd just like a chance to say something.
All I was going to say was he's been governor for 8 weeks. I mean, did you expect him to totally transform the Commerce Department in 8 weeks?
I didn't expect him to give $100 million away after 2 months in the office. Let me finish for a second.
Well, that started under the Purdue administration.
All right, Tom, am I going to have a chance to answer a question?
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
Apparently not. Let's ask fair questions.
I think Henry's a little jumpy.
John, you want to go out for a cup of coffee or something?
Henry's a little jumpy. Let me say a couple things. Pat McCrory's campaign manager, Brian Nick, still works at Moore Van Allen, the law firm. Pat McCrory was very critical of Governor Perdue's son for working at a law firm when they were negotiating incentives. Pat McCrory clearly was paid a lot of money by this law firm. The first time he talked about what he did at the law firm is recently when he sat down with reporters. So I don't think it's a bad idea to actually ask the governor, you worked at a law firm, you were against incentives, now you're giving away $100 million of incentives, and the law firm that you work for is making a lot of money and won't disclose how much that is. I think that's a completely legitimate.
Well, you already. Let me. I want to ask some other people here. John, so far as it goes, I was in the state treasurer's office, and many of you will remember when Mercedes, the big elephant, was looking to relocate in the southeastern United States, and we were negotiating for Mercedes. They got an incentive package. It was like $300 million. Then we had BMW that was looking to relocate, and they ended up in Spartanburg, South Carolina. They got an incentive package. It was better than $200 million. Compare those. Is this worth it?
Well, they are very different kinds of industries.
I mean, you've been opposed to these incentives.
I am, and I think that you have to grant a couple of things about this issue. Number one, the reason why incentives are an issue is because costs matter to business. Business really does care. Business decision makers pay attention to costs, the cost of taxes, the cost of regulations, the cost of energy, the cost of transporting goods to market. Costs matter. If you're not going to reform North Carolina's tax code to reduce the tax cost for business, for all business, then you're going to have these kinds of demands for incentives, and it's going to be politically difficult to say no. Now, was it possible for McCrory to reform incentives in 2 months? No. But if we get 2, 3, 4 years down, he's going to run for re-election, and he talked about reforming the tax code so you wouldn't have to do these kinds of incentives, and it still hasn't been done, then I think you have a legitimate concern.
All right, Peg, Commerce Secretary Sharon Decker went to the Senate committee this week, told the committee that she wanted to keep 3 of the incentive programs. The One North Carolina Fund, the JDIG Fund, the Job Development Investment Grant,
and the film,
and also the film incentives. Going back to what John was talking about, how are we going to do tax reform and still keep these 3 incentive programs going?
Well, you know, it's a difference between being on a campaign and governing. All of a sudden, you have real choices that you have to make. And I think this situation is do what I say, don't do what I do. Because clearly this was a big fish and you couldn't let it get away. Until we reform the entire rest of the southeastern part of the United States with these incentives, it's going to be very, very difficult for North Carolina to say, no, come to see us because we're good folks.
Well, and we've said before, this has got to be something done at the national level.
The good news is that the governor went on Fox Business News and said one of the reasons they came here, and the company said that too, is because of North Carolina's strong business climate. So apparently we have a strong business climate, although a few weeks ago...
that really did happen in 2 months.
But right. Right. I mean, that's what, you know, we've heard everything in North Carolina is broken. Why would people want to come here? And all of a sudden we're saying we have a great, strong business climate, and a company saying we're coming here because of the strong business climate.
Well, I don't think he said it was broken. I think he said it was tarnished.
Let me make one last point. Governor McCrory, nor the Commerce Department, nor anyone sitting at this table didn't choose the timing of this deal. MetLife chose it. They chose the timing of when they were make the announcement and when they were going to come to North Carolina. And again, you know, I think if the governor had blown the deal up, not accepted what had been put in place by the Purdue administration before him, you know, what kind of criticism would he have gotten?
I will have to say, we knew in advance, we knew several months ago there was a big deal brewing in commerce before Keith Crisco left. We knew there was a big deal brewing. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about that more as time goes on. If you enjoy keeping up with what's happening in North Carolina, you'll enjoy our website, ncspin.com, or NCSpin on Facebook. All during the week, our panelists and our viewers sound off with their opinions of the week's events, so be sure to be part of the conversation at ncspin.com or NCSpin on Facebook. When we come back, we're going to talk about car insurance rates.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Baseball players from other countries are considered guest workers here. Baseball, the previous administration and Congress cut a deal in 2006 allowing foreign players to travel freely across the country. Not so for agriculture guest workers. They're vilified for doing work Americans won't, and they face a mountain of red tape just to get here. Shouldn't American agriculture get the same consideration as baseball? Farm Bureau and Agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
Tired of stop-and-go traffic? Travel by train. It's convenient, safe, and affordable. Visit bytrain.org for more information.
We now return to NC Spin.
North Carolina enjoys some of the lowest auto insurance rates in the nation, but just about every legislative session we see some insurance companies trying to change the way we establish insurance rates. The process is a bit complicated, but ultimately the Commissioner of Insurance determines the rates. A number of companies want to bypass this system and allow the free market to set the rates. A number of other companies want to keep the current system in place, including Nationwide, the #1 writer of auto insurance in our state. In a statement, they said, "We do not believe the people of North Carolina want higher insurance rates, more uninsured drivers, a volatile insurance market, or the gutting of the authority of the elected Commissioner of Insurance to protect millions of consumers by rejecting or reducing proposed tax rate hikes, which is what we believe they would get under this bill." Well, as you might expect, when there's a lot of money involved, both sides have hired a fleet of lobbyists to make their case. This legislative battle occurs frequently. Some believe a Republican-controlled legislature might be more willing to change the system. Question one to Peg. We might call this a battle of the lobbyists. You were married to the late Insurance Commissioner Jim Long, who had these same battles over setting rates. Maybe you can share some insights with us. Does our system for setting auto insurance rates need to be changed, and if so, how?
Well, I'm all for full employment of lobbyists, so let me be clear about that, because I are one. But I think this is definitely a case if it ain't broke, don't fix it. North Carolina has the 7th lowest automobile insurance rates in the country. We have the lowest in the Southeast, from Delaware down to Texas. So clearly the consumer benefits from the current system we have in place. On the other hand, you've got 160 automobile insurance companies writing automobile insurance in North Carolina. There's plenty of capacity in the market. So if we have that many companies here, there's clearly not a problem with the rates that they're getting, or they wouldn't be doing business here.
So why now? Henry, what's getting this discussion going now?
Again, I'll defer to Peg on this because this is her expertise, not mine. But you know, from what I understand about it, it's one or two companies that are pushing the idea that, you know,
it's about a dozen of them.
Well, but I think there's one particular one that's been talking about it for 2 or 3 years, and the issue is equity. The question is, are the people who are good drivers having to subsidize high, you know, are they paying higher rates because of poor drivers? I heard
that's the way insurance works. I mean, it's the business of large numbers.
Well, it is and it isn't.
Now, North Carolina is unique in this environment. Virtually every other state has very small numbers of people in the reinsurance facility. North Carolina has some way large percentage of the entire national pool of reinsurance. We do have a different system.
Well, that's because the companies won't accept the risk, and they dump them into the reinsurance
But in every other
facility.
state, they do accept the risk because the rules are different. But here's the point. We have a dominant insurer with a dominant market share that wants things to stay the same. We have other insurers who want to be more aggressive, come in and offer discounts, various kinds of things. A lot of times if you're watching TV, a sports cast, and you see Progressive Insurance or Allstate or someone advertise various kinds of innovative programs, discounts for this, discounts for that, if you look at the fine print, you will discover that in most cases, those products are not legal in North Carolina.
Well, the discounts are allowed. It's that some of the other products aren't, but Senator Apodakas got a bill now that would allow for new
There are several
innovation.
different kinds of bills here, but the point is these other competitors want to come in and take market share from Nationwide. Nationwide wants to keep the system the way it is. So you have to think about it from the standpoint of this is not the insurance industry. These are other insurance companies that don't have as much market share trying to compete in North Carolina. Nationwide likes things the way they are because it keeps competitors out.
Chris, I want to go to a point that Peg made a few minutes ago. We got 150 insurance companies. How many more do we need here in North Carolina? We've got a lot of competition.
Well, I think
what's the beat?
I don't know. so. And again, I think Peg knows a lot more about this than I do, but it does seem like we have 160, I think you said, insurance companies operating, and we have the 7th lowest in the country, and we're always comparing ourselves in North Carolina on every other statistic to our neighbors in the Southeast, and we have the lowest auto insurance rates in the Southeast. Then why in the world, as consumers, would we want to change the system and allow the insurance rates to go up? I'm at a loss. So why that's a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this is this free market ideology. Well, in all honesty, you have to buy insurance in this state in order to be able to drive a car. If you don't, you could, 1, go to jail, and 2, definitely lose your automobile tags and not be able to drive your car. So the consumer has to have somebody to be able to speak for them, and that's the role of the insurance commissioner. Jim Long did it well, and Wayne Goodwin's doing it well.
John made a good point. From what I understand, there are products that you see advertised on national advertising campaigns for these insurance companies that cannot be offered in North Carolina because of our rate structure.
Now, Senator Tom Apodaca's got a bill in the Senate. It's one of 2 bills
and Jeff Collins is pushing it in the House.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that would allow these new products to be introduced with the commissioner's approval.
Right, yeah. So, again, I think...
so at the end of the day...
Remember that we have low insurance rates by national standards for many reasons. The density, the type of roads that we have, the type of drivers that we have. There are lots of different things that explain this. There are many states that have different systems, have higher rates. There are also states that have different systems, have the same or lower rates. There are many different factors that affect insurance rates, not just regulation.
My question all around very quickly, because we're out of time. What's going to happen, Peg?
Nothing.
So lobbyists are going to make a lot of money.
I think the bill she referred to, Senator Apodaca, there might be some minor changes. I don't think we'll see a massive overhaul this session.
I think they want to try to change it to a degree, and they've got the will and the votes to do something that they have not really had the opportunity to do in the past. So you might see something happen.
Well, 2 years ago they had the votes and they couldn't do it. John, what's going to happen?
Change is coming.
Okay. Big, little, minor, what?
I don't know. Some kind of change.
Well, I could have predicted that. The weather's going to change, for God's sake.
The stock market will fluctuate.
While we try to get John straightened out, we're going to take a break and come back and talk about education spending.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Not all high school graduates go to college. Not all employers need college graduates. Are North Carolina's public schools preparing graduates with the skills employers need now? Join the discussion. Visit nceducate.com.
So let me just lay out what we've learned here. We've looked over all the tests, all the scans, and from everything we're seeing, knowing that nothing can be 100% conclusive, looks like we got it all. There's no visible sign of the tumor, but we're going to keep an eye on it. We'll need to follow up every 2 or 3 months for now. But this is really good news.
We now return to NC Spin.
Stand by. Public education is one of the most important functions of our state, so it's always in the news. While K through 12 education accounts for 38% of our general fund budget, it's estimated we spend $8,400 per pupil. The National Education Association reports that North Carolina's per pupil spending ranks us 47th in the nation, with teacher salaries 48th, a decline from last year. 1 out of 9 teachers earns the lowest base salary of $30,000 a year, with the state average $46,000. Education has been affected by recent budget cuts, but NEA and the North Carolina Association of Educators is calling for our legislature to increase spending, especially in teacher pay. I want to ask everybody on the panel, we've talked about this subject a lot. On the one hand, we've got people saying that if we want world-class schools, we've got to pay for them. On the other, we've got people saying that we're focusing on the wrong measure and that we ought to be concerned about student outcomes. Tell us where you come down on this. John, we'll start with you.
I think that as the economy recovers, I think funding will increase in public schools. I think average teacher salaries will rise. I think the main thing to do is to make sure that happens in the context of implementing performance pay.
Peg?
Well, you know, I think the one outcome that we definitely know is lower teacher to pupil ratio. And so if you can get more teachers in the classroom, I think you'll have better outcomes. So you need to invest more in our public education. I mean, it's the backbone of making us a democracy.
Per pupil spending not the answer. I mean, if you want per pupil spending, you can look at the #1 system in the country. You got Washington, D.C. They spend $18,667 per pupil. You don't want your schools to be like Washington, D.C. schools. It's got nothing to do with money. There's got to be a change in the attitude and the way that that we approach education. And frankly, there's got to be more help from home.
Well, but take the District of Columbia out of it. Look at Massachusetts, Connecticut, other states that do very well. Vermont, that do very well in standardized testing. They're in the top 10 per pupil spending. So it's not an exact correlation. There's a strong correlation between states that spend the most and states that do the best. We spend 47 or 48th. We rank 41st. You sort of get what you pay for. But most importantly, I think on teacher pay, we hear a lot about the free market. Well, you can work 15 years in North Carolina now as a teacher with a bachelor's degree and not make $40,000 a year. Think about that for a second. If we really think the market is important and we should reward people for what they do, even before we get to performance pay, how in the world can we have teachers who work 14 years and don't make $40,000 a year when we all agree that teachers are the most important thing to make kids learn?
Good point. John, is there a correlation between spending and outcomes? Chris indicates there is. Henry says there isn't. Can we cite any proof that when we spend more, we get better?
Well, I don't know if you like my answer or not, Tom, but
if
it depends.
It depends. No, I don't like it.
And change will come.
In the range of variation that you typically see, there is not a statistical correlation. I mean, you can't pull a few examples out and say this, that, the other. Some of the highest performing states in the country have low spending. And in fact, North Carolina has relatively low per pupil spending by national standards, and we rank about average. We rank right in the 25-24 range when it comes to scores on standardized tests for the nation as a whole. And in math, we're actually above average. Now, if you look at the world context, North Carolina would be considered one of the highest spending education systems in the world, and we have below average performance for the world. So now, if you were comparing a school system that spent $25,000 a student and a school system that spent $5,000 a student, yeah, at some point money really does determine outcomes because you can hire people that are better. But when you're talking about variations that are the band is much smaller, you're getting fascinated with where you rank at per pupil spending is not the answer. There's nothing wrong with spending more money if you spend it effectively.
But a change is going to come. Is that what you were getting ready to say?
I think education funding will either stay the same or go up or maybe go down.
Chris, here's the question. Are we concerned about the problem of paying all teachers the same thing, regardless of how effective they might be, and unwilling to pay them because there are some who are not effective?
Well, I think there's two separate issues. One is performance pay and merit pay, and I thought it was interesting last year the Senate, Senator Berger, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, had in his education reform package, he wanted to have merit pay, but he looked around and he said, I can't find a state that's doing it well. Well, that's an interesting.
Well, then he tossed it all back to the local
but I mean,
systems.
I think the fact that there's not a state that's doing it well that he couldn't find and he's committed to it shows that it's very difficult to do, even if you support the idea. But I actually think that's separate in this discussion. We could argue all day about performance pay and merit pay. Teachers, as a rule, are all being underpaid. Now, the question is, how do you increase their pay and who gets it? But I think it's hard to imagine that we're going to have quality teachers stay in the classroom, and that's why a lot of them don't if they're not making very much money.
Henry, final question.
Well, you recently highlighted the Moore County superintendent.
Yes.
I mean, you just take that as the model for the state. All of his schools are performing at a very high level. He was just named superintendent of the year. I mean, it's not about per pupil spending there. It's about the emphasis on the technology with all the iPads that they're using and the way they're teaching. But if you try to do that statewide, the teachers union will go nuts. They won't want to do it.
That same superintendent complained, though, not complained, but said we're not funding our schools adequately on this very program.
All right, here's the deal. I'm going to make a prediction that's almost as bold as yours, and that is we will talk about this subject again before this year is over with. When we come back, we're going to talk about pink driver's licenses.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
We now return to NC Spin.
Last year, President Obama declared children who were brought here illegally by their parents would receive a 2-year waiver from deportation, sparking a controversy in our state over whether these persons should be allowed to get driver's licenses. Attorney General Roy Cooper sounded off, saying it was illegal to deny the driver's license privileges. Our Department of Motor Vehicles responded by saying they shouldn't receive the same driver's license as other citizens and determined to issue them licenses with a pink strip and big bold letters saying no lawful status and limited term. Chris, Representative Paul Lupke from Durham says this is outrageous and amounts to ethnic profiling. DMV says these people are here for a short time and it's necessary because identification is important for everybody to know their status. Where do you stand?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is semantics. No lawful status means that they're here illegally and shouldn't be here. But this executive order gives them status. It lets them be here. And I don't understand why for 2 years we can't have a driver's license that expires in 2 years and then they can renew it. And if they're pulled over and they don't have a valid driver's license just like you or I do and it's expired, I do think we're setting up this sort of scarlet letter for people in our state, and I think it's going to continue. And I think this whole thing is to figure out. I think you're going to see more of these kind of licenses for immigrants, and I think it's going down the wrong
Henry,
road.
the DMV says, hey, we're going to issue a new kind of driver's license beginning in December anyway, and it's going to show the status of the individual on there. Is this much ado about nothing?
Well, first of all, it's not pink, it's fuchsia.
Oh, excuse me.
It's fuchsia. Let's get that straight. And then, but you know, the other thing, the driver's license in North Carolina have stripes. The temporary driver's license have stripes for other reasons, not just the no lawful status thing. So
20 seconds, real quick. What's going to prevail, pink stripe or not?
Well, you know, this is despicable, and this is our attempt to tell the federal government that we are going to have to do what they say, but we're going to do it in the worst possible way.
John?
I think pink stripes are out. I think fuchsia is in.
And a change will come. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give us your feedback and read our column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.